Incredible show for you tonight. You might be the luckiest people in Los Angeles tonight because the amount of good looks and intelligence on stage tonight is just out of this world. And we have Robert Breedlove and Alex Gladstein too. So there's that. And with that, I'd like to welcome our guests. Come on out, have a seat. For those of you who don't know, this is Robert Breedlove, the host of the What is Money show. An incredibly talented thinker and writer in the Bitcoin space. And this is Alex Gladstein, the Chief Strategy Officer of the Human Rights Foundation, who has orange-pilled all of HRF, so I'm told. They're even here at this event, which really tells you something. And I'm excited, guys.
Let's do it. Hello.
Me too. You know, I've spent the last couple of days researching and listening to some of the latest things going on in the world of these two gentlemen, and I don't really know what I'm supposed to do tonight because I think they're just going to kind of continue their ongoing conversation, which has been pretty amazing. Some of the things I want to touch on, I think, are the power dynamics in the world, how Bitcoin fixes pretty much everything, if not a little bit slower than we're all hoping. But oh no! Bitcoin does not fix the wine that Robert Breedlove just spilled. Sorry about that. So before we get into the really deep stuff, I do have one question, Rob. As I mentioned, Rob does the What is Money show. And I need to know, Rob, after all this time of doing the show, have you finally figured out what is money?
No, I haven't. Sorry. Wow, that's loud. Is that okay? I think there's like, I have a document that I've been accumulating answers to the question from either guests or books I read, etc. I think I have like 50 answers so far. But one that's probably useful.
One sec, let's just, everybody in the back, if you could just if you want to chit-chat in the back quietly, obviously that's totally fine, but for the benefit of my friends here and for the AV crew, if you could just be quiet, we'd really appreciate that. Thank you. Go ahead, Robert.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. It's amazing how well that works. It works with dogs, too. I guess one answer to that question that's probably relevant to our topic tonight is that money is power. That's an adage you've probably heard a lot of people say. But I think you have to actually decompose that word power a little bit. Because in one sense, we can mean power as an authority, as in one person or one group has power over another person or another group, which is the common way we often use power when we talk about people in a position of power, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously, money gives you a certain influence or authority over others, and that it's what it does. It stores purchasing power. So you've rendered favors to the market, to other people. You've accumulated money, and it holds purchasing power. You can then use that money to redeem favors from other people. So there's a certain level of authority that money gives you. But it's also, when you get into the history of money and how assets monetize, you realize that proof of work is a very necessary component of sound money. Like something that, if money is an instrument that can be used to acquire goods and services that require work to produce, it makes sense that the money that emerges in the market also requires work to produce. Otherwise, if it didn't, you could just produce the money that cost you nothing to acquire the goods and services that cost other people something, and you could steal from them, which is what central banking does. Seigniorage, thank you. So there's this other dimension of power to money that is it's energy per unit time. So the actual watts necessary to produce money, to get gold above ground and refine it and use it. So that's one answer I think that's very useful, and it's core to Bitcoin's value proposition that it does require energy expenditure, which is the only way that I think humans know of in a thermodynamic universe to secure the supply integrity of money. It's how gold works and it's how Bitcoin works. So money is power, but power is a little bit more complicated than we typically think. So that would be one of my answers to that question.
Yeah, I think that money has always been political. on some level, some amount of politics has been involved. Even under the gold standard, you know, the supply of gold was controlled, it was centralized, only certain people had access to gold. People who didn't have a lot of capital maybe couldn't get any gold, and they could only get lesser forms of money. Since 1971, the entire global monetary system has been purely political, meaning if you didn't agree with the issuer of the reserve currency, you couldn't really function. We've been on a pure fiat standard for more than 50 years at this point. So I think the game-changing part about Bitcoin is it gives anybody non-political money. There was a great clip that was going around the other day from a talk that Andreas Antonopoulos gave 5 years ago that laid out the 4 functions of money. We always hear about store of value, medium of exchange, unit of account. Well, there's a 4th function of money, and that's system of control, right? So that's what money has been for generations, has been those first 3 things, but also a system of control. And Andreas' point was that the more that the issuer of the currency kind of focuses on the 4th item, the system of control, it kind of eats away at the utility of the other 3. And Bitcoin is something that refuses to be a system of control. Like, it's not possible to control it, so it's going to unlock a lot of very interesting things for people around the world, and that's what we're seeing. I mean, it allows any 2 people to communicate, transact freely without influence from governments, and that's incredibly powerful.
That reminds me too, when we talk about, again, political power being like authority itself, there's this saying, the philosopher Carl Schmitt, he's like a military strategist philosopher, and he says that sovereign is he who can decide the exception. So all of these relations we're doing in the marketplace with one another, they're game-like, right? We're playing games. We're starting a business, trying to satisfy consumer wants better, faster, cheaper than our competitor. The points in those games are denominated in money. So what we have with this like politicized version of money that is the central bank is an institution that's manipulating the scorekeeping system for markets in a way. And it's like an organization that can never lose. So that it's almost like by making an exception to the rules themselves, or to the points themselves, you have this apparatus of perpetual theft at the heart of every economy. And it's antithetical to the market process itself. So what is Bitcoin? Bitcoin's just that simple rule set. Like, we've always tried to have a rule set that no one can make an exception to. That's what gold was a proxy for. Like, no one knew how to print more gold, for instance. That's why it became money. Well, what is Bitcoin? It's just perfected that we have something, it's an actual set of rules for market competition that no organization, no institution, no individual can make exception to. So it actually empowers the sovereignty of the individual to the maximal extent possible. And we need it. We need a level playing field on which to interact. And Bitcoin gives us that.
Yeah, I mean, gold is great for a lot of reasons. The amount of gold it takes you to buy beer today in Rome is about the same amount of gold that it took you to buy beer in ancient Rome. It's held its purchasing power over time really well because there's no such thing as alchemy. You can't just make gold. You have to actually dig it up out of the ground. It takes a lot of work. There's a lot of proof of work involved. If someone has gold, it means they either expended a lot of energy to get it or they paid a very high price for it. But the problem with gold is, of course, it doesn't work in a 21st century digital economy. You can't email it. It's a dumb rock, right? So the fact that we have now something on the internet that requires energy to use is quite powerful. And I think that in general, we have to understand that what's happening now with our monetary system is that it's becoming much more political. So maybe like people here don't see the need maybe for non-political money because your bank account works fine and you know you have an easy ability to borrow, etc. But for a lot of people around the world, that's not the case. And if anything, the last 6 weeks in the United States have showed us that money is becoming increasingly centralized and increasingly political. Like as most of you probably know, today in the modern economy in the United States, the government does not create money. It creates some money, but most money is created by private actors, by banks. The thing is, like that money that they are creating by issuing loans is done in a market that's backstopped by the government. So the government now is now saying that they're only going to insure certain kinds of money. So if you run a firearms business or a marijuana business or maybe a Bitcoin business, maybe they're not going to insure your money. So like the money that exists that everybody uses is going to start to become very political. There's going to be deplatforming.
Because of those exceptions.
I mean, it already exists. I mean, we saw Operation Choke Point under Obama. Now we're seeing a new Operation Choke Point under Biden. So your ability to use money is a permissioned system. It's gate-kept. Like I help run a nonprofit, and we often are supporting activists around the world. And our ability to do that is permissioned. We have to like ask authorities if it's okay to do X, right? So if you think about the fact that we now have this new system where you can support anybody you want around the world and you don't have to ask permission, that's a revolution. I mean, it's a big deal, and it shifts power back into the hands of the people, which is to the point of the conversation. Bitcoin is money for the people. It's money by the people. And in that sense, I think it's quite American, actually.
Power to the people. And just one more answer to the question, what is money, which Gladstein brought to mind. Money is a tool for moving value across space and time. Gold was really good at holding value across time because nobody could inflate its supply, so you could put purchasing power in it, and you could expect to take purchasing power out of it, right? A fine man's suit is the same price today in gold as it was 100 years ago, as you mentioned about Rome and beer. The problem with gold is that it's heavy and physical, so we couldn't move it over space very well, so it was limited.
And governments centralized control over it and seized it, and they demonetized it.
By virtue of that technical flaw of gold, it gave governments the opportunity to centralize custody of it, violently, forcibly control it. So what did we need? We needed a form of gold.
Just to pause you, 70 years ago, FDR made holding gold illegal in the United States. This is something that if like Turkey did this today, it would be an outrage. It would be like a huge human rights violation, right? The US did it 70 years ago, and gold was illegal for Americans to hold from 1933 until 1975. And coincidentally, April 5th, which is the day that FDR passed Executive Order 6102, was Satoshi Nakamoto's birthday. And 1975 was their birth year when Americans could hold gold again. So clearly like this was on the mind of the person who created Bitcoin.
Yes, Bitcoin was built for this very purpose, to prevent this core human rights violation of restricting people from owning the best tool for the job, which was gold. But again, gold's problem was it's heavy, it's physical, it doesn't allow us to transact purchasing power across a distance, across space very well. So what did we need? We needed currency. But what is Bitcoin?
It promises to pay gold.
Right. But Bitcoin's optimized for both. Because you have a fixed supply, so it holds purchasing power over time perfectly well. And it's digital, it's informationalized, it's dematerialized, so you can move it at the speed of light across space. It's perfected. If money is a tool for moving value across space and time, then Bitcoin's optimized for both. It is the level playing field we needed to prevent government incursions.
And if we're just, for a second, we can like praise fiat in a way, because like, look, it did something that gold couldn't do. It supported the modern economy. Gold was not able to satisfy global commerce because you have to put it on a ship. It's very clunky and it's system
faster money.
So, pre-Bitcoin, I mean, of course we had to use fiat. Of course we had to use credit. But now we have like something that can do global instant digital final settlement, which is, I mean, it's going to change everything.
Let's put Bitcoin aside for a second, because I think even Saifedean came out with his new book, and there are some things that fiat can do okay, but I think
there are a lot of things it can do just fine.
Most of us use fiat in our day-to-day lives, but what I wanted to touch on, and I know this is something that you're passionate about, raise your hand. Do you know what a petrodollar is? You get a few hands raised. And when I first read Alex's article on this a long time ago, it really opened my mind to something that I just didn't understand about dollars. Because I thought, dollars control my life, but they control the lives of us in the US, and they control the lives of people all around the world. And I think to really understand Bitcoin and the power dynamics going on there, you have to understand just how bad fiat actually is. Alex, I'm hoping you can expand a little bit on that.
Yeah, well, my interest in the petrodollar came from my role as a human rights activist and my interest in opposing the Saudi Arabian government, which I think is a horrible influence on the world. They have promoted and invested in Islamic extremism across the entire Muslim world for decades. They have funded terrorism. They have tortured women and female political prisoners. They have sponsored a genocide in Yemen. I mean, these are not the kind of people, the Saudi government, that American taxpayers should be supporting. Is my general kind of where I came from. And then I learned about the petrodollar, which was pretty amazing. It's not taught in our history books, but I'll try to give it an extremely 60-second version. And you can look at, in my book, I have a chapter on it. But basically, like what happened was, in the 1960s, the U.S. government, as it became the issuer of the world's reserve currency, after Bretton Woods in 1944, the world agreed to use the dollar pegged to gold at $35 an ounce to settle all global trade. The U.S. began to sort of abuse this power because we were spending a lot of money after JFK's assassination on the Vietnam War and on social programs in the United States. It was called Guns and Butter. So under Lyndon Johnson, we spent a huge amount of money on war operations in Southeast Asia, Indochina, as well as what was called, basically the social welfare programs, Social Security, education and healthcare for vulnerable people in the United States, because these were very expensive things. So by the end of the 1960s, the U.S. was going bankrupt. Like we didn't have enough gold to support all these claims, and other governments knew this. So the French actually sent like a battleship to New York in the summer of 1971 to claim their gold from the New York Fed, because they didn't believe the U.S. government that we had enough gold to pay them back. So Nixon ended up having to go on TV in August of 1971 and tell the world that we were no longer going to redeem dollars for gold. So he severed the link between gold and the U.S. dollar. After that, what happened is that the U.S. dollar became very weak. We had massive inflation in the United States, and the U.S. dollar lost 50% of its value versus the German mark between 71 and 75. So the U.S. dollar was sort of in free fall, and look, it was set up to be the next reserve currency for a lot of reasons, but that was in doubt. So Nixon hired a guy named William Simon off Wall Street from Salomon Brothers to become the Treasury Secretary of the United States, and he said, we need to find a way to make U.S. debt more appealing. So William Simon said, well, who has a lot of money? Well, the Saudis had a lot of money. They just had created OPEC, and they had more money than they knew what to do with. So he sent Simon to Jeddah, and they created a military pact that's basically the petrodollar arrangement that is still existing today, where the U.S. government would basically agree to protect Saudi Arabia and sell it arms at a below market price in exchange for Saudi Arabia and OPEC only selling oil in dollars and doing what's called petrodollar recycling. So all of the petrodollars that they would earn from selling oil, they would invest back into U.S. treasuries, which would allow the United States government to finance its social programs and foreign policy like in a subsidized manner. And this continued into the mid-1980s when all the Arab nations went broke because the oil price went through the floor, and that's when we got the Japanese and later the Chinese and many other countries to start buying our debt through different types of policies. But basically the point is that the petrodollar is a political construct. It's not a free market construct. It's evidence that the world maybe not necessarily was going to go towards the dollar. At the same time, you had the Eurodollar system, which is evidence that private markets did want one currency, and they started to really adopt the dollar globally. So I think the right way to look at the rise of the dollar in the last 50 years is to say that, to give some credit to the markets and to say that the world did want the dollar through the Eurodollar, we can see that, but also that a lot of this was political, and that's what the petrodollar shows us. Now today what you're seeing, you all hear all this talk about de-dollarization. Nobody's in their right mind switching from US treasuries to Chinese debt. People know that that's sketchy. That's not a market decision. What the Chinese are trying to impose upon their trading partners is a purely political decision. So again, we're seeing the political role of money happen. And I think if we're just being honest with ourselves, we have to understand that the US government is not going to be, the apex predator of money forever. It just isn't. We're just smaller than we used to be. We only account for about 20% of all economic global activity now. We used to account for 50%. We're going to get relatively smaller, and other powers are going to rise. My general theory is that there isn't going to be another government that takes our role. I don't really believe the Ray Dalio China thing. I don't think any smart investors trust the CCP. I think the dollar is going to reign supreme until fiat currency kind of runs its course, and then I think it's going to be the Bitcoin standard. That's what I've always thought.
Well, I hope it happens sooner than later. And I want to dive into...
You don't hold your breath. The dollar will reign supreme for a long time.
I know.
I mean, think about just the fact that you have billions of transactions every day on dollar red. So like, it's gonna take time. But I just don't believe this idea that we're gonna all go and use Chinese currency. It makes no sense.
I used it the other day with me. Alex, I have a personal question to ask you. So I don't know how familiar everyone is with the work of the Human Rights Foundation. It's incredibly inspiring, but it's also incredibly depressing when you dive in and see just how awful some of the things going around in the world are. How do you and the HRF stay so positive when I look outside my window and I get depressed and I need to, go watch a Robert Breedlove podcast to boost myself up?
Yeah, well, credit to my colleagues at the Human Rights Foundation, many of whom are here. Our founders here, our CTO is here, our VP of events is here. And I thank them for coming out and supporting me tonight. But basically, it's about the human spirit. I mean, the people I've met through my 15-year career at this point are indefatigable. I mean, they persist in promoting freedom despite all odds. I mean, you've got people who've escaped from North Korea, people who have escaped from Eritrea, the North Korea of Africa. You have people who've escaped from Cuba, people who refuse to escape from different countries and either go to prison for their ideals or they kind of find a way to build a resistance movement inside their country. 54% of the world's population lives under an authoritarian regime. And what I often see is people not realizing that, especially in the philanthropic field. I think that people are a little disconnected from the fact that Americans are very privileged in many areas. In the area of nonprofits, number one, I can donate to the Electronic Frontier Foundation and they can sue the US government, which is awesome, and I do that. But if you live in Saudi Arabia, you can't donate to a nonprofit that sues the Saudi government. You would get imprisoned, beheaded, whatever. So, I mean, a lot of my time at HRF has taught me the value of a free society. It's so critically important. And I think that that's really the thing that you learn is that what we have is to be treasured. I know that America is very imperfect, and I've written a lot about that. But I think the goal for us is to improve America, for us to reduce the exploitation we have of other countries, for us to reduce the amount of support we give to dictators. That's the path forward. The path forward is not tyranny. That's why we're here, is to fight tyranny.
Exploitation. Are you saying that the World Bank and the IMF are actually evil organizations, Alex? Care to explain?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think everybody knows that the United States government's history is patchy. There's a great movie called Why We Fight. It's based on the Eisenhower family, and you should watch it. It's very powerful. I mean, Eisenhower's last address was basically warning about the military-industrial complex, and I think we've strayed very far from the ideals of our founders in many ways. And I think that what we should be doing is trying to get back to those ideals. I don't think the solution is to support dictators. That's what we're trying to fight, is tyranny. So what I'm trying to bring to the table is a balanced view of saying the American values are what we should fight for: free speech, private property, open capital markets, the freedom to believe what you want to believe, the freedom to be who you want to be. These are beautiful American values. They've been screwed up, they've been transgressed, and we can fix that. But it's sad for me to see all these people cheer on the rise of Xi Jinping or Putin. I mean, this is a disaster. I mean, you don't want to live under these regimes. And I see a lot of that in the Bitcoin community, so I get kind of depressed sometimes. I don't know, maybe you want to respond to that.
Well, just something to add, maybe some color around what you were saying there. I was reminded of, we talk about Executive Order 6102 often.
Yeah.
Rarely do we talk about Executive Order 11110, which was JFK's proposed executive order to take the currency issuance monopoly away from the Fed, basically to restore it to the states. And that was an executive order that was proposed shortly before his assassination.
Yeah.
So it just, back to the point of money being political. Here was who I consider to be the last real president of the United States, someone that was trying to uphold American values, individual freedom. He went toe-to-toe with the central bank, and we saw how he was assassinated, right? He was taken out, and then what do we had? We had Vietnam, and we had the Petro bomb. It's all of these follow-on consequences came after the guy that was trying to stand toe-to-toe with the organization violating human rights was taken out. So I just think it's something important to remember, right? Like JFK was such a symbol for American freedom, and I think Bitcoin is kind of like enshrining the principles he stood for in something that can't be shot and killed.
Well, I think it definitely enshrines a lot of Jefferson's principles, that's for sure. I mean, look, what I see in my work every day is people in dictatorships using Bitcoin. Not because they want to, not because they want to hang out with us necessarily or talk about Bitcoin. It's because their local currency sucks, it's collapsing, they live under sanctions, or they can't connect to us. They're a second-class citizen, and they have to use Bitcoin, and that's what I see. So I think it's like an effective tool that I think people should have access to. It doesn't solve all our problems, but I think it's really important for a lot of people. And I've seen enough. I mean, I saw enough 5-6 years ago when I started to do this. But I think it's a cornerstone piece of any sort of honest liberty project is financial freedom. And fiat currency is inherently political and only can work if you please the people issuing the currency. That's the definition of it. So there will be more deplatforming, there will be more demonetization, there will be more social engineering. I mean, what's going on in China should horrify people. If you don't comply completely with the Chinese government, they take your rights to use money away from you. And I mean, I fear that could happen in Europe, in the United States, and elsewhere. So I think, the goal here is to help people understand that there's an option, there's a plan B. That's what we're doing at the Human Rights Foundation. We have many programs, and one of those programs is focused on financial freedom, and it's on helping activists understand this, learning from them. I learned from an activist from Afghanistan. A woman named Roya Mahfoub taught me about Bitcoin a long time ago. She had to use it because it was the only way she could pay her employees. And it opened my eyes a lot.
She was the first person to teach you about it?
I mean, I'd heard about it. I saw the WikiLeaks thing, I saw these things, but I remained very skeptical for a long time. We started taking Bitcoin in 2014. We did a fundraiser for Ukraine in 2013 for Maidan Square and Bitcoin. This is all stuff you can find on the internet. But I was like, I just didn't get it. I just wasn't that interested. And finally, one day, Roya, she really helped me understand. And I think that's what it is. It's money for disenfranchised people, basically. And it's a tool. And it's just like encryption. Anybody can use it. Bad guys are going to use it, just like bad guys use Signal. But for all these people who say that, Putin uses Signal, so therefore we should get rid of it, that's a terrible take. That's missing the forest for the trees. The point is not that Putin can communicate with his daughter on Signal. The point is that all Russians can communicate without Putin knowing, right? Similar to Bitcoin. Yes, Putin can avoid some sort of sanctions with Bitcoin. I get it. But the big point is that he can no longer control the economic fate of millions of Russians. That's the bigger picture.
I have to point out, we were talking about guns and butter before. It's kind of ironic that many Bitcoiners do love guns and butter. Let's move on to something very exciting. I don't know if you all know, there are 71 days left until we find out if Balaji's bet comes to fruition. These two gentlemen here were on Spaces with him recently. I'd urge you to listen to it. I would actually say they were more listening to a Spaces that Balaji was talking on. And because of that, I wanted to give you two the opportunity to kind of share your thoughts, because it's a hell of a prediction that Bitcoin's going to go to $1 million in 90 days. And if that happens, many Bitcoiners might go, yay, but at the end of the day, that would spell some trouble for everyone around the world. So I'd love to hear your thoughts, your takeaways from Balaji's thoughts, and then maybe we'll move on to the Q&A.
Yeah, so the background of that is Balaji basically accepted this bet. I don't know who it's from, but they bet him Bitcoin would not hit $1 million in 90 days. He accepted the bet, and what I got from his perspective is that he's doing like a Paul Revere type maneuver, right? Paul Revere riding through the streets saying the British are coming, leading up to the American Revolution. It's a warning. Balaji's bet is intended to be this, bit signal that he calls it, to indicate to people, and hopefully a wide set of people through the publicity that it gleaned, that the printing is coming, printers are coming, right? Fractional reserve banks are insolvent. Again, Bitcoiners not surprised by any of this. We're like, yeah, no shit. I guess what we've been saying too. Well, what is a bit surprising is that aggressive timetable, the 90 days. I think, of course, it's not out of the realm of probability, but I think it's a very slim probability that that's possible. And I hope that it does at least get people's attention to this message that we've been constantly sharing inside the Bitcoin community for a long time, and that is that central banking, fractional reserve banking, these are scams. These are systems of confiscation that are constantly stealing people's time, effort, energy, and it's going to accelerate now as a result of the latest banking crisis or the emergent banking crisis that we're currently in. So Balaji reached out about all this. We had some conversation. He suggested that we come on the space and we talk about it. I think close to 500,000 people tuned in for that. So the Bit signal had at least some of its intended effect of getting more attention, more people looking at Bitcoin, and ultimately him just identifying Bitcoin as the escape mechanism from the impending fiat inflation that we know is coming, although maybe not in 90 days.
Yeah, I mean, it was fascinating. I think the Balaji bet is really going to be something interesting to look back on. I don't think Bitcoin's going to go to $1 million in 90 days. But I think what he was betting on was potentially a fracture in the system. If you actually kind of think about it, Bitcoin went from $3,000 to $69,000 during a time of great money printing in the United States. You know, there were, and I'm not someone, I distinguish QE from money printing, but you know, what the US government did from a fiscal point of view during COVID was literal money printing. I mean, they did helicopter money. They put trillions of dollars of new money in people's checking accounts. And what Balaji is hinting at is that he thinks that there's going to be a sort of system change here, where there's going to be basically assets that are valued at less than $1. Let's say like you have a bond that due to last year and current existing high interest rates is now worth 40 cents of what it used to be. Like it's a 40-cent asset that was issued at $1. Okay, so you've lost 60 cents on that dollar. The U.S. government through the BT, like the BTFD and all these other facilities is willing to accept that lousy collateral for pristine collateral. So like what Balaji's thinking in his mind is like, wow, there's gonna be like a lot of subsidization of collateral here. And I think, you know, he's just betting that like the next 90 days are the transition moment when things go crazy. It's not out of the question, I think it's unlikely, but I do think you see such a moment in the next decade at some point. Like there's gonna be a fracture moment where the system collapses. He's just betting that it's gonna happen now. I think it's gonna happen eventually. And I think the other important thing to notice about this is that he's, I mean, he's basically, and it's a little bit of a stunt, but you never know. I mean, you never know. It's so fragile. The Bitcoin is such a young asset that its order book is not very thick. So when something eventually does happen like this, it will happen very fast, and no one will be able to predict it. No one predicted the fall of the Soviet Union. No one predicted the Arab Spring. I mean, no one predicted the Great Financial Crisis outside of a handful of people. Like, anytime something like this happens, nobody predicts it. I mean, nobody knew. I knew a lot of people who worked at SVB. None of them knew they were that it was going out of business. So I think that he's just betting that this like seismic shift was going to happen now, which that was interesting.
Yeah. Ernest Hemingway said about bankruptcy, right? Someone asked him, how do you go bankrupt, I think was the question. He says, gradually then suddenly, which became Parker Lewis's epic series, etc. It is going to be gradually then suddenly. I don't think it's within the next 90 days. What do I know? It could be, maybe not. Who's to say?
I think it's going to be before 2030, though.
Yeah. I would say, though, somewhat in his defense, like the recent announcement that the BRIC countries, right, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, I think, they're announcing plans to start moving away from the US dollar as a transactional medium.
Yeah.
These things reduce demand for the dollar. So this is going to be a radical acceleration to domestic inflation. In the next 90 days, probably not. But in the longer time horizon, I think he's directionally correct, maybe just not.
One of the other interesting things I'd propose to you is that Bitcoin could accumulate in value really rapidly without the dollar losing its status as the global reserve currency. In fact, I think that's probably what happens.
I agree with that.
I don't really buy the BRICS thing. Like, global investors are probably not that excited about investing in like something run by Erdogan and Xi Jinping and Putin. Like, they'll force what they can force with debtor countries, right? But like sophisticated global investors are going to be pretty wary of that. Bitcoin went from $3,000 to $69,000 while the dollar strengthened against other fiat currencies. The milkshake theory. I think this is pretty likely. I think you could see Bitcoin like totally moon while the dollar gets even stronger against the euro and the yen and the yuan. That could totally happen. So I mean, in the next decade, I could see a world where the dollar gets even more important and Bitcoin also gets more valuable. I don't really see I don't believe that there's I don't think they're mutually exclusive.
Back to the network effect of money, I agree. I think the dollar is the last fiat currency standing, right? Before all fiat currency actually collapses into Bitcoin. So, but we're in totally uncharted territory. Like, you can look at the history of fiat currencies and try to extrapolate what you think might happen, but then you also have to add the variable of the digital age, that information moves faster than ever, and there's an escape hatch called Bitcoin.
The last thing I'll say, and maybe we can move to Q&A, is that if you look at all the other issuers of reserve currency in history, the Dutch, the British, they were empires, they committed human rights violations, but they had rule of law at their heart. Like, they had a system of rule of law in the capital which issued the currency. The Americans as well. So if you're telling me that all of a sudden we're going to have a dictator with no rule of law issue the reserve currency, I don't buy it. So I think it's going to be a democracy that continues to issue the reserve currency until it's something else. And I think that something else is Bitcoin. I don't think it's going to be a dictatorship situation here. But I mean, we'll see.
It will be sudden, I think. It will be gradual and then sudden. Whatever happens, it's going to happen suddenly.
Go ahead.
So buy Bitcoin. Gentlemen, I want to thank you for an amazing conversation. We have gone way over, which I kind of knew was going to happen, and I'm here for it. I don't know we can do a full Q&A, so I'm going to do a quick lightning round of one question to both of you, kind of a dual question, if you can, in your own words. For the people who are here who are new to Bitcoin, 60 seconds, I know this is hard. What is Bitcoin, and why should someone buy Bitcoin?
I hate the word should. I should first
Why
say
should
that.
they consider it?
If you believe in the principle of justice, right, that people should have the right to keep what they earn, very simple. I don't think anyone can look you square in the face and say that's not the way things should be. Then you believe in Bitcoin. It's just symmetrical money, right? So whatever fruits of labor you accumulate for yourself and you store in Bitcoin, it's going to be there, right? Now, of course, there's price volatility and there's all this risk of a new asset emerging, but in the sense that if you've accumulated one Bitcoin, you have accumulated one out of a possible 21 million forever, right? You have a guaranteed fraction of the total money supply. That's symmetrical to the work that you put in to acquire it. So it's justice incarnate in a way. So if you believe in justice, or you believe in life, liberty, and property, believe in human freedom and flourishing, then you believe in Bitcoin, whether you know it or not yet.
I think Bitcoin's a voluntary phenomenon. I would never try to convince somebody to buy Bitcoin, but I would convince you to try to invest your time in Bitcoin. I think you should learn about Bitcoin. I think it's very important to learn about Bitcoin and to ask people that you care about to learn about Bitcoin. I think learning probably leads to buying, but that's up to you. That's up to you. So I would encourage you to invest your time in Bitcoin and then see what happens next. So that's what I would leave with the crowd. Thank you.
All right, everyone. I'm not above saying you should buy Bitcoin, but I will say if you'd like to buy Bitcoin and support a good cause, you can go to swan.com/HRF, and the fees will be donated to the Human Rights Foundation.
One last shill. If you like this kind of content and you want to talk about human rights and money and freedom, we hold a conference in Norway called the Oslo Freedom Forum. Robert will be there. A lot of friends of Swan will be there. It'll be in June 13 to 15. You can visit oslofreedomforum.com and get tickets today. We're going to have an awesome financial freedom track. It's a fun event. It's midnight sun. It's in Scandinavia. You can get a direct flight from LA. Why not? Let's go.
Very excited, and I'll be doing the What is Money show with a number of guests at the event, so it should be an awesome time.
All right, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.